On the narrow plains of southern Anatolia, the fate of empires is about to be decided. A young Macedonian king, barely 23, stands at the head of 30,000 men. Before him lies the full might of the Persian Empire, commanded by its ruler, Darius III. The world watches as Alexander the Great faces his first true test against the great king himself. In just a few short years, he had done what no one thought possible: united the Greek world, crushed rebellions, and crossed into Asia to challenge the greatest empire on earth, Persia. To most, it was madness. Persia was vast, an empire that stretched from the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of India. Its king, Darius III, ruled over millions, commanded endless armies, and believed no mortal could threaten him. But Alexander was no ordinary mortal. He carried the blood of warriors, the mind of a tactician, and the ambition of a god. Every night, he slept with a dagger in one hand and a copy of Homer's Iliad in the other. By 333 BC, his conquests had brought him to the edge of the Persian heartland. Cities fell before him, armies shattered at his command. And somewhere beyond the mountains, Darius gathered his forces, a tide of men and steel that would drown any ordinary army. But Alexander wasn't coming to survive. He was coming to make history. Two worlds, one young, hungry, and untested, the other ancient, proud, and vast, were racing toward each other. And in the narrow plains of a place called Issus, destiny waited. The gods had set the stage, the kings had drawn their swords, and soon the world would witness a battle that would decide who would rule it. After crushing the Persian satraps at the Granicus River, Alexander's campaign swept across Asia Minor like a storm. City after city opened its gates: Sardis, Halicarnassus, the lands of coastal Anatolia, all falling under the banner of the young Macedonian king. To his men, it felt unstoppable. To his enemies, it felt inevitable. But in the distant east, King Darius III was done watching. He was no longer sending generals to fight for him. This time, he would lead his army himself. The great king of Persia gathered everything his empire could muster: infantry from Babylon, cavalry from Bactria, archers from Syria. Hundreds of thousands marching under his name. As Alexander marched south along the Mediterranean coast, Darius moved north through the mountains, both unaware that their paths were about to cross. The Persian scouts lost track of Alexander's rapid movements. Storms scattered their intelligence lines. And then, in one of history's great twists of fate, the two most powerful armies in the world accidentally passed each other. Alexander to the south, Darius slipping in behind him. When word reached Alexander that the Persian king had taken position near the coastal town of Issus, cutting off his supplies and threatening his rear, he didn't hesitate. He didn't retreat. He didn't hide. He turned his entire army around, marching through rain, mud, and darkness, to face the greatest force on earth head-on. In that narrow coastal plain between mountain and sea, two kings now stood on a collision course, and by sunrise, the fate of empires would hang in the balance. To the north, stretched across the field like a living ocean, stood the Persian army, shields glinting, banners fluttering in the wind, their ranks reaching beyond sight. King Darius III, wrapped in royal purple and gold, sat high upon his chariot, surrounded by his immortals, the elite of Persia's might. To him, victory was already assured. He faced a boy, a foreigner, outnumbered 10-1. Across the field, on higher ground, stood Alexander the Great. His men were exhausted from days of forced marching, soaked and bruised from the storm. But their eyes burned with something far greater than fatigue: faith. Faith in the man who led them not from behind, but at the very front. The ground between them was treacherous, a narrow strip of land hemmed in by the mountains on one side and the sea on the other. There would be no flanking maneuvers, no room to retreat. Only one way forward, through the heart of the enemy. Alexander rode along the lines, his horse Bucephalus pawing at the earth. He called his men by name, veterans who had followed him since Greece, warriors who would follow him into hell. And then he pointed his spear toward the horizon. "Today," he said, "we face not just an army, but an empire. And before this sun sets, the world will know which king the gods truly favor." The trumpets sounded, the air grew still, and the silence before the storm began to crack. The silence broke with a roar. Persian war horns echoed through the valley as thousands of chariots surged forward, their blades spinning, their horses screaming through the mud. The Battle of Issus had begun. Arrows blackened the sky, raining down on the Macedonian lines. The earth shook beneath the thunder of Persian cavalry. To Darius, it was a spectacle of overwhelming power, the full might of an empire unleashed. But Alexander didn't flinch. He had studied the terrain, the patterns, the weaknesses. He saw what Darius could not, that the narrow field turned Persia's strength into a trap. Their numbers, once an advantage, now choked their own movements. With a signal, Alexander sent his phalanx forward, a wall of bronze and pikes grinding through the Persian front line. The center bent but did not break. And then, with terrifying precision, Alexander led his companion cavalry in a sweeping charge down the right flank. He didn't wait for safety. He didn't wait for certainty. He charged straight into the heart of the enemy, spear leveled, eyes locked on the golden chariot in the distance, the throne of Darius himself. Steel clashed, men screamed, dust and blood filled the air. Alexander's charge tore through the Persian flank like lightning, cutting deep into their command line. Every strike brought him closer to the king who ruled half the known world. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. A young Macedonian king charging through chaos, an empire trembling before him. And then, as the dust began to clear, Darius looked up and saw Alexander coming straight for him. Through the chaos and dust, Alexander saw his target, the royal chariot gleaming in gold. Darius III, King of Kings, stood surrounded by guards, his command crumbling before his eyes. Alexander drove his cavalry straight through the Persian line, a wedge of steel and fury. Spears shattered, men fell, the very ground shook beneath their charge. The young king fought like a storm unleashed, cutting his way closer and closer to Darius. And then, the moment came. Their eyes met across the field. One filled with fire, the other with fear. Darius hesitated, just for a heartbeat, and then he turned. The king of Persia fled. His chariot wheeled away, crashing through his own men as panic spread like wildfire. What began as battle became chaos. Tens of thousands of Persians broke and ran, trampling each other in terror. The great king's army was gone, not defeated by numbers, but by courage. Behind him, Alexander did not stop to celebrate. He simply watched the horizon, silent, knowing the empire of Persia had just begun to crumble. When the dust settled at Issus, the world had changed. Darius fled, leaving behind his family, his wife, his mother, his children, all captured by Alexander. But the young king treated them with honor, not cruelty. Word spread across the lands. The boy from Macedonia had defeated the King of Kings. From Greece to Babylon, his name became legend. In one night, he shattered an empire and rewrote history. Alexander was no longer just a man. He had become what he always believed he was, something greater, something destined to rule the world. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this.